All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am Z, have had the great pleasure of organizing today's and tomorrow's sessions in this room. Thanks very much to Advanced Technology International, ATI, for sponsoring this panel, as well as the other ones we had earlier today and the 4 sessions that we've got tomorrow. ATI is also sponsoring a happy hour, so starting right after this panel wraps up, there will be a bar open out in the entry area for about half an hour, and then we'll move into a networking space just on the other side of the hall for about 5-minute quick conversations on several programs that ATI is managing in the health and med tech space with significant amounts of funding coming through those programs, so don't miss that. There's a QR code on your way out the door that you can scan for a link to information about all the panels, and all the recordings for the panels will be posted there in a few more days. But without further ado, I want to bring Tom Campbell and the fantastic panel up on the stage for removing barriers to biotech breakthroughs. So join me in welcoming them, please.
Oh, there's the clock. Outstanding. Well, thanks, Z, for that fantastic introduction. And it's a thrill to be here. It's actually my first time at South by Southwest, as well as I think a couple of our panelists, too. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's panel, Risk versus Reward, Removing Barriers to Biotech Breakthroughs. I always have to have a good, lustrous panel name. I'm Tom Campbell, founder and CEO of FutureGrasp. We have a rockstar panel here today, I'll be introducing shortly, but first I'd like to sort of lay the groundwork about a few words about what is this thing and what is the state of biotechnology in general. Biotech and its industrial counterpart, biomanufacturing, have long been means for mankind to use living organisms and cells to produce molecules and other biological materials for improved healthcare and food. While many benefits have come from the development and production of new medical treatments and increased crop yields, recent advances have pointed to the potential for a larger aperture for what we call risks in the national security space and threats upon the US economy and its national security in general. And so we'll touch upon a few of those issues herein today. So biotech capabilities are now available to manipulate a large swath of the fundamental aspects of nature with a capital N itself, which is, to me, as just a dumb engineer, it's just astounding what you guys do. And powerful tools are applied by researchers and biomanufacturers overall, including things such as editing of genomes of human cells and crops, designing and producing new vaccines and proteins. We heard a lot about that on the last panel. Producing whole organs ex vivo, that is to say, out of the body, for transplant, enabling neuroprosthetics for disease control and human augmentation and enhancement, as well as synthesizing biofuels for transportation applications. So nations globally are trying to leverage and harness the power of biomanufacturing overall. China itself is especially heavily invested in biomanufacturing, as demonstrated in their recent 14th year, 5-year plan for bioeconomy development. I always love these 5-year plans, as if you can forecast what's going to happen in 5 years in really any technology right now. The European Union also has an active bioeconomy strategy and has invested billions of euros into the space. So the amazing thing with biotech is there's several mind-bending possibilities overall to use the technologies mentioned in nefarious ways as well as good ways. Present and growing future threats or risks include those to the US bioeconomy, foreign or upon biodata, and from adversary militaries themselves. More advanced capabilities such as whole genome via CRISPR, the designer proteins, synthetic biology, what they call synbio overall, and neuroprosthetics present expanded future attack vectors that also should be closely tracked. However, the larger opportunity is generally positive in this space. What we are not trying to do is say, oh, shut everything down in biomanufacturing in any way, shape, or form. Even modest progress toward utilizing biological innovations could revolutionize economies, societies, and our very lives. We heard quite a lot the last panel about how vaccines have essentially saved the day in many ways in the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of us wouldn't be here right now with them. So imagine the impact on what we eat, wear, and the medicines we take, and the fuels we use, and how we construct our physical world. In this panel, we'd like to focus specifically on 3 goals. First is a frank discussion of how government policy and regulatory environment can impede emerging technology, especially biotech. Second is an information on current efforts of the National Security Commission on emerging biotech to enable and support the bioeconomy and biotech breakthroughs. And lastly, third, opportunities for further improvement across the government and industry to support emerging bioeconomy and biotech breakthroughs. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. On my immediate right here is Dr. Emily Leproust, founder and CEO of Twist Bioscience. To her right is Dr. Alexander Titus, Commissioner of the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech. And to his right is Dr. Genya, Chief Strategy Officer of BioMADE. So I'd like to ask each of you to please offer a few minutes of further introduction. Although it's in the brochures, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, what you brought to this panel, and comment on how you think biology could and will change the world overall. Let's start with Dr. Leproust and then go from there.
All right. Well, good afternoon. It's great to be here. My name is Emily Leproust. I am the CEO and co-founder of Twist Bioscience. Actually, I did my PhD in Texas. I was born in France, but I learned English in Texas. I didn't pick up the accent, but I do know that you all is one person and all you all is two or more. So now I'm an American, of course, and at Twist, we write DNA from scratch. And so if you have a sequence that you need for applications such as diagnosing diseases or developing a drug or developing a new biomaterial, you go on the Twist website, you enter your sequence, and then we have a machine that will print the A, C, Gs, and Ts of DNA, and we have miniaturized that chemistry on a silicon chip. And so leveraging the power of silicon, we've been able to massively increase the throughput of DNA synthesis. At the same time, we've decreased the cost of DNA synthesis. And as of today, you can get your gene cloned in your vector shipped in 5 days. And if you've been in the lab and you've cloned yourself, you know that cloning is the 21st century equivalent of coal mining. Right? You're moving clear liquid from one tube to the next, to the next, to the next. And you do all that work to get to your experiment. And so we do all of that for you on the silicon chip. And so we think there's amazing opportunity with DNA. At the same time, we recognize that DNA is a dual-use technology. And so we're massive proponent of biosecurity and screening, and we'll talk about that more later.
Thanks. Awesome. Dr. Titus.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. I'm Alexander Titus. I go by Titus. Everyone's favorite fermentation-based bioproduct is just outside the door in 53 minutes and 26 seconds. So hold on to your idea of your favorite biotech product. So I'm here representing the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech. I'm one of the commissioners. There are 12 commissioners from 4 members of Congress, 8 members from the private sector, academia, and think tanks thinking about how do we support, use policy to support the US bioeconomy and biotech and biosecurity. And so regulation and policy isn't just a risk, there's lots of ways that we can promote that. I have been involved in the national security and biotech space for a while now. I was fortunate enough to be part of the starting of biotech modernization at the Department of Defense back in 2019, which led to BioMADE, which I'm very proud. Probably one of my proudest parts of being part of this is people like my fellow panelists being involved in the industry, bringing you out of think tank world into the biomanufacturing space, things like that. But there is, the thing that I'm most excited about is we're on the cusp of every time we want a solution to something, someone will ask, is there a physical, chemical, or biological solution to that problem? And a lot of times biotech is talked about as if it's the only hammer to solve a problem, or people want it to be the only hammer, but in my perfect world, you don't even consider if it's a biotech or not, because it's so part of the solution space that we have an entirely new dimension, orders of magnitude more solutions to a lot of the problems we're trying to get at. And so that's why it's so critical and why I'm so excited to be a part of it. And it's cool to be that South by Southwest is starting to think about biotech and national security, especially in the context together. So I'm glad to be here.
And I also think he has the best t-shirt here on the panel. So NatSec Biotech, for those who can't see it. Thanks, Dr. Titus. Dr. Dana.
So I'm Genya. I'm the Chief Strategy and Economic Development Officer for BioMADE. BioMADE is a manufacturing innovation institute. of America. And so these innovation institutes have been stood up and sponsored by various parts of the federal government over the last several years to really push the boundaries in what we can manufacture here in the United States. And the priority being in the biological space. How can you use biology, those microbes, those algae, those fungi, those yeasts, to make everyday products that are pervasive in our life? And how can we do that at scale? And the scale that we're talking about in terms of changing the world is massive. So if you think about the precursors for many of the things that you use every day, whether it's your laundry detergent, whether it's the plastic film on your foods, whether it's the coating on your raincoat, whether it's the gas you put in your tank, those things are traditionally sourced from petroleum-based products. And the ability to bring biology to bear and start to move biological processes and systems into making those products is a massive opportunity for us in the United States. So BioMADE as a nonprofit organization really brings together the ecosystem of young companies, big companies, universities, nonprofits, to ensure that we've got the support and the ecosystem in place to really move biology to that next scale, that massive scale that we need to really change the world.
Excellent, thanks guys. And so I'm going to ask a couple general questions. Maybe start with Dr. Titus, just mix it up here a little bit in terms of order. So how would you like to recommend we balance risks that some people may have heard of from our ability to manipulate biology with the opportunity offered by this powerful field?
Yeah, I mean, there is real risk when it comes to, we heard before about the kind of pandemic potential and the things that we have not put a grasp on of biology as it exists today. And so engineering biology certainly can exacerbate some of those risks, but at the same time, it dramatically improves our ability to respond to some of those risks. And a lot of the way that I personally think about it and talk to a lot of people about it in this context is that, you know, if we're concerned that a new biorisk will emerge, but we can't predict what it is, the best way to cancel out an infinite threat space is to be able to make an arbitrary and infinite response to whatever that is. So, you know, positive infinity minus minus infinity, 0, right? It's bad math. It's happy hour time, so bear with me. But that's the idea, is like there is risk, but the opportunity not just to solve some of the problems we have now, but then also grow economies, build new technologies, right? If we have that third physical, chemical, biological solution to things, we're going to have technology that we can't even imagine. We're seeing that today in so many different aspects. And so to me, they do counterbalance each other well if we build it responsibly, right? Building things without, you know, DNA screening and things like that, you know, some of the things that we've all talked about for a long time are important, but that risk to me is outweighed by the benefit and opportunity, and one of the opportunities is to deal with that risk.
Outstanding. Dr. Dana, would you like to add to those comments?
Anytime there are these rapid technological advances, there will be concerns about what does this mean and how do we really think through what we should be concerned about and at what magnitude. And so with BioMADE and the work that we do, bringing together the community, and particularly around the project work that we do, in terms of over 70 different projects bringing together different members of our ecosystem, $150 million already out the door in our first two plus years. We integrate something called 4S into all of our program. And that 4S is the safety, security, sustainability, and social responsibility questions that emerge with any of these technological developments. So in our work, we take this really seriously as we look at how manufacturing is advancing and changing, not only how we relate to the natural and the physical world, but how it's going to change different industries and the products and things that we interact with every day. We want to ensure that we're doing this very responsibly and carefully, starting at that base level and layer in terms of how do you construct your organism or your process, but then what is the final product that comes out that people are intending to use or needing to use? We incorporate those kinds of considerations into the project work that we do with our partners.
Excellent. Dr. Leproust?
Yeah, for me, I think about risk in 3 ways. So there's 3 risks that I see. One is a biosecurity risk, and so are we making something that is dangerous and is being put in the wrong hands? And so we are, I think, top of the line in terms of screening both the sequences and the customer. And so what that means is that if someone orders Ebola and they work at the CDC developing vaccine and diagnostic tests, we will do it, we'll ship it. But if someone orders smallpox to be delivered into a PO box in North Korea, right, we obviously won't do it, right? So that screening of both the sequence and the customer is very important. And screening is actually hard because the cost of DNA is going down, and at the same time the cost of screening goes up. And so there's almost a perverse incentive not to screen. And so we need to make sure that everybody is screening. So that's the first risk. I think the second risk is a risk of supply chain. We know that DNA can become a choke point to a lot of good stuff happening, and so we want to make sure that there is onshore capacity for synthesizing DNA to make sure that we are not reliant on a foreign adversary like China to get material, either in a normal state, but even more important in a crisis state, such as what we saw with the pandemic, where some customers were desperate to get access to material. So that's the second risk. And then the third risk that I see is the risk around IP theft and IP, making sure that the DNA sequence is actually very, very important and valuable IP. And there's a lot of US customers that don't realize, but they're sending that IP to China. Mm-hmm. And the first step that they have to do is to screen. And so they have to look at it. And then we need to make sure that those foreign adversaries don't get too much of an incentive to learn from that data and use it to compete with us. So from a US competitiveness point of view, I think we need to think really hard about the value of the IP of the sequence that we send to foreign adversaries. So those are the 3 risks that I see.
Outstanding. So maybe shift to the positives a little bit. How can we ensure U.S. innovators have the freedom and resources they need to deliver on the amazing promises of biotechnology and biomanufacturing in general? Maybe start with Dr. Dana this time.
So we are really excited, obviously, about the work that we're doing and the work that we see particularly from young innovators, and the ability to really take things like waste gases or sugars and turn them into everyday products. Tires. Who knew you could actually make rubber and tires out of dandelions? This is actually a product that some of our members are working on. And so we rely on our investors and to not discount these really wild ideas, but where BioMADE really comes in then is we provide the support and indeed increasingly the infrastructure to really prove out that those technologies can work at a scale that is that provides a surety to investors and larger clients that this technology has legs, right? That we could rely on this technology over time as something that can replace inputs that we may be getting from somewhere else in the world. So we really see a strong role in being able to give the investor community in particular not only a sneak peek look into what's coming down the pipeline. These dandelion rubber is a great example of this. Don't knock it till you try it or till you see it. And to be able to work with them to understand what are the kind of properties and the economies of scale and the techno-economic factors that they're looking for to ensure that the technology can actually move to a commercial partner or through a commercialization process.
Dr. Leproust.
Yeah, I mean, on the plus side, I mean, the positive outcomes are going to be so amazing. Already today it exists where you can take a test, which is a blood test, and it's not like Theranos. It's actually a lot of blood, right? So you feel a bit woozy at the end, but our customers use our DNA from the test, look for a needle in a haystack. When you develop cancer, every cancer cell sheds their DNA in the bloodstream. And so if you study and you sequence the DNA in blood very deeply, most of what you see is normal DNA, but you can detect cancer at stage 1 or 2 when it's relatively inexpensive to treat, survival rates are great, and there are many cases where people get a positive test, they go get a scan, and then the cancer is so tiny they can't even see it in a scan. They don't know where it is. And so it's very different from the way cancer is typically diagnosed, where someone feels a lump and it's so big that you can see it in an optical scan. So that exists today. You have companies like Moderna and others. They are developing the personalized cancer vaccine, right? So based on your cancer that was just detected, a few weeks later, you get your own mRNA vaccine against your own mutation. It's N of 1. You're the only patient with that drug. And it used to be that medicine was blockbuster medicine. Everybody got the same drug. It doesn't matter if you're tall, short, male, female, old, young, it's the same drug. And then it moved to precision medicine, and we're getting in a world where it's going to be personalized medicine. And in our lifetime, cancer is going to become a chronic disease, and which is incredibly amazing. And so, and that's just in the area of medicine. There's areas of food security, and we just heard about materials, where the positives are going to be so great. Where there'll be a point where I think synthetic biology and biotechnology is going to be kind of like quantum physics. My phone runs on quantum physics. Nobody cares. It's quantum physics. Like I have an app, right? And it's going to be the same thing with. It's going to be the same thing with synthetic biology. Nobody will even know that it's synthetic biology that's creating that amazing thing, and because it's just going to be everywhere. So that's a great thing. And what we're trying to do at Twist is enabling that work. And what we do, thanks to our technology, is again reduce the cost. And so what that means in an environment right now where drug companies and startups and even big companies in general, they have a pressure on the budget that they have to do research. What we do is we offer more shots on goal. Our costs are 2 to 3 times cheaper than if you buy it from someone else. And so what that means is I always love to ask people, do you have more ideas or do you have more money, right? I especially like asking them in front of their boss, right? But everybody says, oh, I have more idea. If only it was cheaper, I'll do more. So that's what we do is, our costs are 2 to 3 times cheaper than the competition. And so they get to try more things and to get to the outcome faster. And so I think that's extremely positive, and I couldn't be more optimistic. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we've got to screen, and we've got to incentivize screening. And so, for instance, I think if someone gets US government dollar to do research, they should buy from companies that do screen, and there are lots of good companies that do, and so I think it's important to keep reinforcing that point.
Just a quick follow-up, just because I'm super curious. There's many types of cancer. Is there certain types of cancer that are being looked at right away, or just general?
So it used to be that blood cancers were the first treatment because the delivery of the drug was easiest.
Yeah.
And there are drugs FDA approved now that are personalized, and they are extremely expensive. I think it's like $500,000 per cure. And so the research directions are around lowering the cost of that, and then moving to solid tumor.
Solid,
and the idea over time is, right now if you have cancer, you go to an oncologist and you have, breast oncologist or brain oncologist or liver oncologist, and in the not too distant future that will change. It doesn't matter where it is.
Just
it's which gene.
Oncologist with genes.
Yeah, is
That's
it
fantastic.
P53 or is it HER2 or?
Outstanding. Dr. Titus.
Yeah, I've spent so much time in the government space about this because I think the government is an amazing partner of innovators and companies and startups. BioMADE is a Department of Defense public-private partnership. We heard from Kate Six earlier today, who leads biotech for the department. When I started the role 5 years ago, I got laughed out of a lot of rooms, and so I'd call Kate and come scare some people with me. Let's scare the pants off of people. And then they weren't laughing, they were more crying out of those rooms. But 5 years later, the department is investing a lot of money, billions of dollars, into helping grow and support the innovators and grow the bioeconomy in the US because it's recognized as a national security. Economic security is national security now. And so, government's hard to work with at times, but when the apparatus starts to move, it puts a lot of support behind the innovation ecosystem that is in the United States. And so, there's this National Security Commission for Biotech, I'll talk about a little bit later, is really focused on that now. And how do we take the next step and how do we go beyond from where we are now to continue to double down on helping companies really grow? And the foundational research, right? The DoD had been funding work in mRNA-based vaccines for decades before we had vaccines for the first mRNA vaccines that we heard, record time, right? So that's government funding innovation, and we're doing more and more of that in the life sciences every day because we recognize that. And this panel is a testament to that, right?
Absolutely.
South by Southwest is talking about biotech, not just healthcare, but biotech now as well.
Yeah, they say it's a century of biotech right now, I've heard from many different sources. So that leads and segues beautifully into my very next question, which I'll toss right back at you, Dr. Titus, is the risks of over-regulation and over-promises from the U.S. government. Could you expound upon that from your position as commissioner?
I mean, there is risk, and there's things that scare people, government people, industry, and I'll get one specific example is the AI-bio intersection.
Yeah,
and people are worried that AI is going to make it easier to invent bad things. And right now, we don't quite have a grasp on exactly the bounds. It's changing so fast. It's certainly changing faster than policy adapts. And so there's always a risk of, all right, hold on, let's just hold on real quick, slow it down for a sec. Let's all get our wits about us. And sometimes that makes sense. And sometimes we realize, all right, maybe that was a little too much break. Now we can update it a little bit. So there's certainly always a little risk of that.
Sure.
But at the same time, a lot of regulation also gives guidance, right? And yes, everyone loves to complain about the FDA and APA and all these regulators and stuff, but in reality, they at least what you need to do. And so I think that policy needs to evolve with this pace of technology, and it's never going to be, I work in AI, and every 3 weeks I feel like I need to get a new degree because it's changing so fast, and biotech is the same. And so I think one of the bigger risks of policy and regulation for slowing down is just not being able to keep up.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. That's why the National Security Commission for Emerging Biotech was stood up, because, okay, we need to take a serious look at what we're doing and the policies we have to support this, because if we don't, someone else will, some other country will, and we will lose some of that leadership that the innovators in our country have right now, right? Cheaper, safer, into the idea of safety, security while innovating. Not everyone has those same things. And so policy's responsibility to keep up is really important as well.
I mean, the pace of technology development, AI, biotech, what have you, it seems to me that it's just all one ginormous ball of technology in a way, the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary space.
Well, to the quantum comment, right? Eventually, it doesn't matter what type of technology it is.
Yeah.
It does what you need it to do. It solves a problem.
Absolutely. It can be both good and bad.
Yeah.
So maybe Dr. Dana could comment from the BioMADE perspective on that question as well.
So I just spent the last 4 or 5 days in Washington, D.C. talking with our elected officials and really having a wonderful opportunity to explain what the opportunity is around the things that they care about. For example, when you're speaking with someone who has a textile industry in decline, and they are a senator or representative from that state, and you share with them these shirts here that we've got partnerships with, where we're turning sugars from agricultural feedstocks into textiles. You just see their eyes just light up. Oh, okay, so this could really mean something for me, and what do I need to do in order to help this industry come alive? So from BioMADE's perspective, we see the government as a tremendous partner in this process. And at the same time that I'm showing these things like textiles to them, they start asking me questions like, well, what will happen, what's going to stand in the way of this coming to bear? Are the technologies that are producing these feedstocks, are they using genetic engineering techniques that might be really tough to get through a regulatory process? And so actually, the farmers who would be producing the crops going into, we get some pretty sophisticated conversations going here, but the crops that are going into producing these feedstocks that are coming through these supply chains, will they be able to make it through those regulatory processes in time for it to make a difference in my textile industry? So that is a really great kind of conversation that we can have with elected officials, because they're also then in a place where they can advocate for the types of policy changes that would make this industry come to life, and we can do it with real tangible examples.
Are you seeing, in general, one specific sector or a handful of sectors more rapidly adopt biotech from the BioMADE perspective, or is it pretty much universal?
We really work across a lot of different industry areas, whether it's food, whether it's textiles, whether it is different chemical precursors that are going into national security or defense-related applications. So for us, we see, and then we're really thinking about this, particularly when we're building infrastructure, which I know we may get to in a minute, but really looking at how do we provide the support and indeed the infrastructure for a wide variety of different products, such that those that need to flourish move into the industries. Every industry area has its own sort of market power and market potential, and also the Department of Defense and national security needs influence the places in which we see our partners starting to show up.
Outstanding. So Dr. Leproust, maybe comment on regulation policy from the industry perspective.
Yeah, so I think it's going well. In some way, I could almost argue for a little bit more. I take a few examples. One example is back
I'm writing that down, by the way.
Yeah. Back to screening. There was a guidance in 2012, and we've worked very closely with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and in 2023, there's a new guidance that came out, which leveling up the biosecurity, and so we're super supportive of this new guidance. And now the next step is to implement it, and so NIST has been charged to implement it. And it's, again, we could do a bit more, for instance, by incentivizing US R&D dollars to make sure that those dollars only go to the companies that do the screening and do it well. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, the risk of IP, and I think that's probably one area where maybe there could be a little bit more regulation around making sure that the sequence information that key IP that has national security value, that if that sequence information is going to be exported to a foreign adversary, well, there probably needs to be some checks and balance there to have some visibility onto that. So that's something new. That's one area that I think the government could work with industry to make it a bit stronger. And I think the outcome will be that we could lift the US competitiveness and making sure that frankly, it's a big battles between us and China, and it's a big race to biotechnology, and I think we all know about silicon chips, right? We would not want our most advanced NVIDIA silicon chip to be made in China. It's kind of the same thing with DNA sequence. That the DNA sequence that transforms sugar beet into the textile, you don't want that to go to your adversaries. And so there's probably, right now, I don't see a risk of over-regulation. I think I think industry is very much willing to work with the US government to actually do a little bit more. And of course, it has to be thoughtful because we don't want to limit the ability for US company to send DNA to the right partners out of the US either. So you want to make sure you don't throw the baby with the bathwater.
Don't want to absorb it in the 5-year plan of China, for
That's
sure.
right, yeah. Yeah.
So I've heard a lot about funding, and the government is certainly a major funding source of biotech, but there's also the private sector and investors and so forth. So I'll just throw it open to anybody who'd like to comment. The benefits and risks of private sector investment into biotechnology. Who'd like to take that one up?
Well, I can start, but I don't see the risk, so I think I only see the benefit. I think that's one of the amazing things that we do in the US is there's massive venture capital that goes into funding great ideas, and that creates technology, that creates IP, that creates jobs, and that creates taxes that get reinvested, and that's one of the amazing things about the US of A is that amazing entrepreneurial spirit that creates economic value. I mentioned in my opening remarks that I was born in France, but I'm an American. But when I go back to France, I say, what are you doing? Well, I run a company, based in California, and they're like, why did you start your company? And it's like, and there's two reasons, right? And the first reason is to change the world, and over there they're like, how arrogant you are to think that you can change the world, right? And then the second is to make a lot of money and create value, and they're like, how obscene you are to want to make money, right? And so, but that's in the US, it's like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's do it. So I think that there's only positive, I think, that can come from investment. And those investments are really risky. Most investors, if 1 out of 10 gets it out of the park and 2 survive, they can return the fund. And so it's very risky business, but I think it's good overall, for the users, and it's good for investors, it's good for employees. It's just so great. So as long as we screen DNA that's being made, I only see positives.
Outstanding.
So I would say that we spend a lot of time at BioMADE understanding how to transition from a really great idea that may work well in a lab or a small facility to something that a larger company like a Cargill or 3M, a Lockheed would want to buy. And there's a lot of work, obviously, that needs to happen in that, from it works great on the lab bench to it's ready for commercial scale. And part of what needs to happen in that space, and we know that this is important to investors, is that you're able to prove out your technology. And we call this sort of at the pilot or intermediate scale. So it works great in a lab bench, but I'm not ready for prime time. Where can I go run my process or my bug in a bioreactor that is a little bit bigger than what I've had access to before? It's got different environmental conditions. I need to run it for a longer period of time. Right now, we know in the United States that those pilot scale type of manufacturing facilities don't really exist here in this country. They exist in Europe, they exist in China, Southeast Asia. And so one of the big places where BioMADE is stepping in to fill this gap of data and assurity and technological maturation is actually by building these pilot scale manufacturing facilities where these young innovators can come in for the 6 weeks or 6 months that they need, really gather the data, work out the kinks in their technology. Not all of them may work, but we need to know that as well. And that process, we feel confident in putting this infrastructure out into the United States. 12 to 15 of these pilot scale manufacturing facilities is really important to enabling investors to trust that the technology has legs and viability around it. So we, in the infrastructure build that we're doing with these 12 to 15 of these pilot scale manufacturing facilities, particularly with government support, because these cost about $100 million or so to build per facility, and very few private sector entities are going to put that kind of investment into something that they only need for a short period of time. But BioMADE can do this, particularly with government support matched with state and other resources, because it's a multi-user facility. We do that initial investment, and then the young innovators and entrepreneurs can come into those facilities for the period of time that they need, do what they need to do, leave, the next one comes in, so on and so forth. So BioMADE is really helping to set up this infrastructure that provides the assurity and the maturity that investors are looking for around this technological space.
Excellent. So in the remaining roughly 20 minutes, I'm going to ask some specific questions about your unique organizations, and maybe we'll start with Dr. Titus and explain, what does the National Security Commission Emerging Biotechnology do, and how do you promote the advancement of technology for positive?
Yeah, so the NSCEB, which is a lot less sexy of a title of an acronym as BioMADE, but the National Security Commission for Emerging Biotech was stood up as the next evolution of the government kind of fostering the biotech community along the way. So BioMADE can tackle problems that no one company cares about. Kate talked about a little bit earlier the investment in the next stage of kind of manufacturing capacity in the US. And so the commission is really focused on, how do we think about what's next? What is the next thing that the US needs to do to continue to foster this ecosystem and this economy? And so that we're structured in, so we have 12 commissioners, 4 members of Congress, 8 members of the private sector and academia. We have 4 kind of working groups, so we have an amazing staff that runs each of these working groups. We have one that's focused on bottlenecks and choke points, so how do we actually alleviate some of the supply chain risks that you were talking about? We have one that's horizon scanning, so how do we think about fostering the next wave of innovation that comes in the biotech space? We have a working group focused on risks, and so how do we think about managing and mitigating risks and helping deal with some of those issues? And then we have a working group focused on partnerships, workforce, domestic and international partnerships within government, within industry. A lot of our amazing staff is here in the audience today, and so the staff and the commissioners talk with hundreds, probably thousands at this point, of different companies and different individuals to get that collective input for what are the things that need to be done. And then ultimately our responsibility is to write legislative recommendations to Congress, because we are a congressional commission, to recommend what things need to go in the Farm Bill, what things need to go into the National Defense Act to be able to actually move the needle on these different topics. Data security, AI, manufacturing capacity, all of those go into our considerations. We released an interim report in December, which is available on our website, biotech.senate.gov, and we're going to have a final report issued this December, which will be a collection of all of our recommendations that we've learned from that. And then the next phase is, how do we make all that stuff a reality?
Yeah, and so how do you anticipate assessing and guiding and directing future advances in the tech space itself? You mentioned artificial intelligence, for example, which is coming up super fast and furious with things such as ChatGPT and large language models being applied to drug discovery. Is the commission undertaking assessments of those things as well?
Yeah, and we're listening to the people. We're bringing in and having briefings and interviews and collecting data from the people who are leading at the edge of that.
Outstanding.
Talking from the companies who are putting it into practice in pharma and in industrial biotech, talking about from the people who are building the infrastructure, the hardware, the software. We're talking to all of them. And every week, it's like, all right, we got to talk to a new set of people, because it's progressed beyond the people we talked to last week, so we got to keep at that.
That's fantastic. And Dr. Leproust, maybe a little bit about Twist Bioscience, what you do therein. And I know I've been to visit once about a decade ago, but I'm sure it's advanced a lot since then. And I'd love to hear what you do and what you see as the advances coming forward.
Yeah, so again, what we do is we make DNA from scratch. And what we realize is that almost, if you ask 3 customers what kind of DNA they want, you get 5 opinions. And so everybody wants something different. And so we've industrialized DNA synthesis, again, on the silicon chip, but it's going to sound like Burger King, but it's DNA your way, right? So you want a 300 base pair, a 500 base pair, a 1,000 base pair, 5,000 base pair. You want it single-stranded, double-stranded. You want it cloned in a cloning vector, an expression vector, in your vector. Then you choose your mass. You want 10 nanogram or 100 nanogram or 1 microgram. You choose, do you want it dry, resuspended, in a buffer, normalized? Do you want it in a tube or in a plate? And the plate can be half skirted, full skirted, can be nice 3D4, 1536, can be an eco plate. So you go on the website and you choose, kind of like Starbucks, it's a million combination, and then you press go, order. And you know, the cheapest tube we make can be like $25, right? And so you need to be able to manufacture that DNA to that specification, and the revenue per tube can be low. We also have, one time we shipped a tube where it was $9 million in one tube, right? So there you don't want to tell the person that's putting in the tube at the end that it's, you know, that pipette has $9 million. Because then they shake and everything. You know.
Don't have the intern do that one.
Yeah, exactly. But so it's really, it's all automated, and it all gets made on the same silicon chip. At the end, it gets split out and sent to the right customer. And I always joke that the easy part is actually to make the DNA. The hard part is to put the right label, send it to the right address, and send the right invoice. I mean, that's the hardest part, actually. And so we do that, and then we do it. We're the fastest and the cheapest. And then the last hard thing is we do it at scale. And so right now we have a capacity to make 3 million genes a year, and it's public knowledge. Last year we shipped 572,000 genes. So we are right now only using 1/6 of our capacity. And so we tell our customer, just back up the truck. You know, you can't break us. You're gonna run out of money before we're gonna break. And so and you know, it's been working, and the number of customers is ramping. What Wall Street wants to hear, the revenues are ramping. So it's all going up into the right direction. And then our customers are dragging us into new areas. So we used to just sell DNA, and now customers say, well, you make the DNA, can you do one more step to make the RNA? Sure. Sometimes they say, now you have the RNA, can you do one more step and do the protein? What can I do for you, right? And so, we are constantly expanding, again, based on customers' demand. So I'm traveling all the time, just asking customers, what can we do for you? What else can we do for you? But it's all in the area of starting from that miniaturization of DNA synthesis with the inkjet printer that we built, that prints ACGT, and those droplets of ACGT we print are 10 picoliters, and when they land, the size is 50 microns, so it's the size of a hair. So it's massively miniaturized. When I did my PhD in Houston, it was, at the time, it was amazing. We synthesized, I think, somewhere 2,000 or 3,000 pieces of DNA at the same time. And now on one of our chips, we can synthesize 1.6 million oligos. And then we have a new chip that actually is working for data storage, where we can synthesize 256 million oligos. Right? So the miniaturization is, well, just starting. That lowers the cost, increases the scale, and again, the idea is more short-term goals for the budget that people have.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Dr. Dana, maybe you can comment. Your organization, BioMADE, does accelerate innovation using biology to manufacture things more on the later scale. So manufacturing is obviously a huge and complex space in industry. How does BioMADE do this work in general?
So I know that you said that South by is having a biotech moment. I think they're also having a manufacturing moment. And that is really wonderful to see. We at BioMADE, I think of it kind of like a three-legged stool. Again, we're a nonprofit organization that brings together the community, the stakeholders between industry and government and academic institutions, and bring the resources to bear for those innovators to work their way through technological maturity. So get those really good ideas that they've got in the lab working at increasing levels of scale, mature them, and then find the right partners that will take those technologies, whether they're in the private sector, whether they're our government or national security partners, and move those into supply chains, and supply chains that really originate here in the United States. So we do this not only through the project funding that I outlined at the very beginning, bringing together government resources with a cost share and a match from our industry partners and our academic partners. And to go back to the dandelion story, that is an ability to bring together more sort of aspirational researchers with more mature researchers, get them into a facility where they can really prove out, like, how do you actually get the wax from the dandelion roots extracted and then processed and in a scale and at a quality level that does not vary over time. So how do we line up the right partners for that process to mature over time, and then bring in customers who can put in, then these are the technical requirements that I'm going to need, these are the specifications, this is how the stuff has to function when I actually start to use it to make tires or to make gaskets. So we really bring that ecosystem together with the resourcing, and we surround that not only soon to be with our own manufacturing facilities, but the workforce component of this. So this is also really, really important. When you say manufacturing is having a moment, it needs to have a moment, because the people who need these jobs, who are transitioning from industries that may be sort of taking a back seat and moving into a new innovation space, we spend through BioMADE time working on developing curricula and retraining of workers, particularly at the 2-year and vocational technical space, because this has to become not just more specialized work, but this has to become production scale manufacturing. And so the worker component of this and the reskilling of workers is also an important place where BioMADE is able to bring together industry partners and academic partners, and increasingly, I would say, our military partners. So if service members are transitioning out of military service, we have a program in California with Travis Air Force Base that does this. How do we set up curriculum and training programs such that our service members can find jobs in this space? And actually, we're putting together, we have the resources to get bioreactors so they could actually turn the knobs and the dials on these machines and get hands-on experience of what it means to work in a manufacturing facility.
Outstanding. So before we make closing comments and so forth, I'd love to open it up to the audience for anybody with specific questions. We've got a great panel here. Fire away if you go up to the microphone over here. Anybody with specific questions? Don't be shy.
8 minutes and 49 seconds to your favorite fermentation-based biotech.
No pressure.
I wanted to thank you all for the great session. A comment and a question. I wanted to add a comment with respect to Twist. So you'd mentioned the greatly reduced cost. And you alluded to, but in my mind, one of the huge advantages is that greatly accelerated speed. Because when we're making medicines, there's a finite number of iteration cycles that we can do before we have to say, you know what? I hope it's good enough. We have to stop. We have to initiate manufacture. We have to move forward. And the ability to go do something that typically takes 30 days and do it in 5 means you can get closer to a more perfect medicine, or you can engineer something closer to satisfaction. You want to test more things, which the cost is great for, but you also want to check all those things and then iterate. And so I just want to, that's part of the acceleration we're seeing in biotech, is the ability to iterate faster with these technologies. The question I had for you was, during the pandemic, we had a conversation that went back and forth continuously about the origins of the coronavirus. And some people saying it was, natural origins, others saying, well, could it have been a lab leak? And in my opinion, the question was wrong. I don't think we needed to find a smoking gun and get a specific answer. I think it's sufficient to ask, is it possible that this could have happened? And that should have been enough to alter policy. And look, I work in this space. I don't want to be inhibited in my ability to go work on antipathogen research, but I think if you look at the history of BSL-4 facilities, like they all have had leaks at various points. I think you can say, I don't care what your percentage is of assuming it could have happened from a lab leak. I think it's sufficient to say if it's a non-zero percentage, we should have additional regulation control at the sites that are performing BSL level 4, level work or at sites that are performing certain types of research that could be at risk. And we've talked about the screening at the level of the DNA being produced, but we don't have similar, or at least in my opinion, sufficient controls at the areas where people could be creating. I think there's a place for gain-of-function research, but I think certain types are dangerous. I think you don't want to put an oncogene inside of a lentivector, and there's things like that that do happen, and I wonder what the process is to be able to create something that is not egregious, but is more effective to deal with the fact that there is a possibility that we could create something in the future that could leak.
Yeah, maybe I can start. That's a great question, Jake. And that's part of the guidance that we want to be enforced more as uniformly as possible. To your question about the COVID origin, part of the guidance is that we actually have to retain the sequences that were made, not a physical retain, but at least a digital record of the sequence that were ordered. And so we can go back and make sure, oh yeah, no, we've never made that sequence. But unfortunately, probably only 70% of the synthesis company actually do this. And so if it was not a natural origin and it was ordered from out of the 30%, we'll never know. And then the next step is right now, most of the analysis to detect whether something is dangerous or not is based on homology of what is the closest gene from which organism, and what would be useful is working with the government to create actually a database that everybody can have access to for screening, so it will be a bit more universal. And then there's the next level of leveraging AI, because potentially with AI you could actually mask what your true intent is. And initial experiments have shown that if you use AI to fight AI, actually it can work. And so I think you're raising a question that we totally agree with, which is how do we constantly level up the bar of screening to make sure that we promote ethical use of DNA. And every innovation is like a coin. You have a good use and a bad use, and dynamite is amazing to make tunnels and it kills people, and so you want to maximize the use of dynamite to make tunnels and not killing people. It's the same with DNA. And so we really need to work together to level up the bar, and at the same time, if there's a bar and not everybody is screening, then it's useless in a way because it disincentivizes the right work. And so there's that dual work of getting better at screening and enforcing it.
I worry about, I think the AI thing is a good point. I worry about groups that if I put my black hat on and go, how would I get around these? I think ordering a bunch of short oligos where homology is difficult to detect and you alter the codon usage, and then they do inefficient, but they could perform PCR overlap extension, and that potentially could avoid some of the traditional methods of detecting someone ordering something problematic.
Actually, that is exactly what we pushed in the guidance. The old guidance was you only screened long piece of DNA, and the new guidance, something we pushed for, was screen the short ones and screen for what the intent is with the oligo. Could you assemble them into something longer? So actually, that's part of the new guidance. Good. Again, we do it, we screen. Not everybody does.
I'll sleep a little easier at night. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Any other questions? So perhaps we'll close out the panel. Love to hear from each of you what your final thoughts are and how you envision working together with others to advance biotechnology opportunities and minimize its risks overall. Maybe Dr. Dana, start.
So I want you to, if you take one thing away from this session, just think of this shirt, right? This is a partnership between LanzaTech and H&M and Adidas. And just imagine a world where you're able to pull CO2 and waste gases off of steel mills. Push those gases into a bioreactor, have some microbes, use the hydrogen and carbon as the energy, chop it all up, and out comes the precursors for basically anything you need in the world. This shirt is just a representation of that, but I want to leave you with, this is the world that we're building, and it's massive. And we are already working with Twist, who's been a member of BioMADE from the very beginning. Curriculum development is a big piece of what we work with on them. We work with the National Security Commission on the policy changes that are necessary to ensure that the market is driving what comes out of the bioindustrial manufacturing pipeline, and the future is really bright.
Excellent. Dr. Titus?
I don't have anything as trendy to share. I can give you the shirt off my back, I guess. But I would say that the long and the short of it is we have a commission panel tomorrow at 10 in the room over there. So you can come and have this long conversation about how we could work together.
Sounds great. Dr. Leproust?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll echo what I've heard, which is, yeah, the future is incredibly bright. Biotechnology is going to improve the quality of life, decrease food insecurity, is going to improve the health of humanities, of our pets, of the world. So I think it's all amazing, all fantastic. At the same time, I think industry working with government, we need to make sure that we put the safeguards in place to make sure that we maximize the positive use and minimize the negative use. And then I think the last thing is the economic value that is created is so enormous that I think it's irresistible for others to not try to steal it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very important to make sure that we keep that IP and don't let it slip into the hands of our foreign adversaries.
Outstanding. So to close out, I'd like to thank our sponsor, ATI, the great coordination by Christopher Z. Zember, and the entire South by Southwest team for supporting this panel. I hope we can continue this conversation over a happy hour right after this. And I'd like to officially close the panel, and let's give a great round of applause for our outstanding panelists.
Esta flor se